Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is August 30th, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Please subscribe. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Mary M. Burke. Where are you calling in from, Mary?
I'm calling in from, I suppose, Metro West, they call it, one of the suburbs of Boston.
Oh, how cool is that? First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
I guess to not put themselves down if they made a mistake, but to use that as a way of learning.
Oh, how cool is that? That's a major theme in our whole discussion today. So that's McLuhan called it, how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough?
Okay.
How do you turn a rejection into a redirection? But that's really beautiful. I like that. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
You know, that has changed. I find now that I like to, depending on the writer, because of course I'm always thinking about writers, I like to read a novel first and then say with somebody like Faulkner, where the dialect is really important, I like to then listen to a really good actor reading it. And I find that, so I guess I like to combine forms. I like to read and then listen. And of course, that's only possible since Audible has become a mainstream thing. And I've really got into that. So,
yeah. But listen, Mary, listen,
yes.
Before there was printed word, that's all we had.
I know. That's the discussion I had.
All we had was books on tape. Right. But there was no tape.
Right. No, I have that discussion with my students all the time because they very guiltily say to me sometime, oh, I learned through hearing. Is it okay if I listen to the novel on Audible? And I say, well, you know, in the past, when only one person in the house was literate, that's how you would have heard it. You know?
And the other one you'll love is the phenomenon with Finnegan's Wake is we learn how to read Finnegan's Wake when we're kids because our parents read to us and we can't know what the letters mean yet, but we're kind of figuring out, they just said queen in that, that might be the word. And so we're learning. So then when you read Finnegan's Wake with a group of people, you're literally more aware because I'm like a idiot. I was raised in front of a TV. I can't read good, but I can read good enough and get away with it. Sound like I'm an intellectual, but I look at every syllable in the Wake and how the person is reading it. And it makes me, you don't read, we really read casually. We don't read every syllable. We fly over syllables. So then I'm sorry to go on now, but this is directly related to Dublin, where you were born, right? You were born in Ireland?
No, I was born in Galway, Nora Barnacle country. But I went to college in Dublin and lived there for quite a while. Right. So I kind of feel like I know both. You know?
Right, but you were born in Ireland. That's what I
was born in Ireland for sure, for sure.
So then when I go to the Finnegan's Wake Reading Club every week in Dublin, Sweeney's Pharmacy on Zoom, these people walk in because it's a tourist trap. And they kind of like, it's literati tourist trap. And they walk in and they read. We had a woman, talk about Faulkner. We had a woman from Mississippi walk into Sweeney's and read the Wake. She never read the Wake. She probably didn't even know what she was getting into. They just shove a book in front of her and say, here, read this in front of this Zoom screen. And she read it better than any of these people like me who would like study Joyce for 30 years. She read it better because it was just flowing letter, black ink on white paper. So she was
like, yeah. You know, you remind me of something. I've occasionally been at Boston College when Joe Nugent, the great Joycean there. I'm sure you know Joe. when Joe has had his sessions on Finnegan's Wake. So I haven't done it too often, but I've done it enough to find it a really interesting process, because I went to a small rural elementary school in Galway, right?
Yeah.
So, we heard our teacher, he was a relatively young man, but he was very into sort of getting us in touch with sort of folk culture and older culture and lore and local lore and everything. And so when I listen, and again, it's listening to other people reading or people reading portions of the page at BC, I hear these snippets from my childhood, like prayers and ditties and rhymes. It's always kind of popular stuff or sort of, old school prayers and so on that our teacher would have exposed us to. And I just hear it, and it's incredible. And it's very strange time travel for me to sort of listen. And it's listening where I hear it, of course, for me.
Yeah. So it's super what you said, because going with this, what's your favorite form of information? You basically said books and books on tape at this point. Let's divert for a second. Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
An example from my dad. My dad was a voracious reader. He would read fiction, he would read nonfiction, he read everything. So I think he was my start. And that teacher I mentioned, that elementary school teacher, he had, so we were from near Lough Corrib, which is the biggest lake, I think, in Galway, maybe straddles into Mayo. And we had on the shelf of our elementary school little library, tiny library, on the shores of Lough Corrib, I think it was called. It was Sir William Wilde's 19th century book about our region. So I think my astonishment that this, what I thought of this featureless kind of rural landscape, was actually full of meaning, full of history, very old history, very old ruins. And so that kind of book, and my dad constantly having, Galway authors, like Walter Mackin was a big Galway author who was always in our house. And I think it was a combination of those two people in my life very early. And the James Joyce Quarterly allowed me to dedicate an article to my dad, because the article was about, I was reading Galway lore, West of Ireland lore of women and the poor in the dead. And I was editing the article as my father was dying. And so they don't usually allow dedications, but I said to them, I couldn't have written this article without growing up with the father I grew up with. So they made an exception. Yeah, it's one of the most, it's probably the most personal scholarly thing I've ever written. And I was very happy and touched that they let me dedicate it to him. So
that's really beautiful. And so why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Why do they gather information? I guess for the very first, in connection to the very first answer I gave you there, we need to, I guess, understand ourselves as human, understand our past, to put things in context, to understand patterns.
That's good. And is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
You mean for humans in general?
Yeah, for humans in general.
It has to be innate. I mean, even the most basic early human population, they had to somehow convey to the children how to gather and hunt, right? So it's necessary for survival at the most basic level. And then we become more sophisticated and sort of have more sophisticated levels of novel. But ultimately, with the way I suppose the world is going, it's becoming an issue of survival again, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to understand the environment. You need to understand AI and so on in order to actually survive.
Yep. Do thoughts create emotions?
Do thoughts create emotions? Well, yeah. I don't think we're really rational. One of the best lines I ever read about scholarship is that it was a pushback against the notion that all scholars are rational people, intellectuals, and so on. And the person said, and I can't remember who it was now, but they said to the audience, "What's your wound?" Because that's what you address in your scholarship, even if you're not aware of it. So I think that even, people are always kind of returning to some primal conundrum or issue that they had from a very early age, even if they dress it up in very sophisticated terms in their work, I think.
Mary, I missed the word. What's your rue? It sounded like R-U-E. What is the word you said? What's your...
Gosh, I don't know. I'd have to I'd have to carry this back. What was I?
But it sounded like what you said was what McLuhan eventually changed the medium as a message to, is the user is the content. So the writer of the intellectual, you're saying intellectuals are rational.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the word you missed there was wound. So the
wound,
W-O-U-N-D, that notion that you think that you are being rational and intellectual, but ultimately you're going back to something unaddressed or unfinished in your own psyche with your scholarship.
So you mean like a wound, like you had trauma as a kid? Wound.
Yeah, or even less dramatic than that, just something unfinished in some way.
Yeah, unfinished is a good word.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. So fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I...
I suppose many times until I write it down because of my training.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, because basically McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it, and Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Oh, very good. I'm pleased that I echo Joan Didion.
And can humans think without language?
Well, yeah, because again, I suppose I don't know, for some reason, I'm always thinking back into how humans first evolved culturally at the very earliest points. And that is the big question, is how did language evolve? There must have been moments before language evolved, right? There were noises and there were ways of communicating, I presume, but language wouldn't have been instant. So yes. And of course, some people have conditions that mean they don't use language, and
Yeah, but it's like grunting. Well, we try to decipher, guess what the first human invention was. And people sometimes go language, a tool. One of my favorite answer was lying. And then another person said the other, like the fact that there's another person. But Augusto Palau, a Theater of the Absurd, says the first human invention was theater.
Theater.
It's really interesting because theater sort of encompasses it all. You got a rock. You got a rock, and then you're trying to tell the person if you hit the rock, and then the plant will grow, or you get the piece of food, and then they're acting things out. It's like charades was the first human invention. No,
that's great. That's great. Well, we just had a very similar conversation yesterday. I've just started teaching for the semester, and I'm teaching drama, and we were trying to figure out how at its most basic, at its earliest in human culture, what is drama?
Yeah, because have you check out Theater of the Absurd? Oh no, not Theater of the Absurd. Theater of the Oppressed is Augusto Palau, the South American guy. Anyways, here's the next question, Marion. Thanks. Sure. It's really fun. You really get what I'm after. Okay, this is Chomsky. Language is not just words. It's a culture. It's a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Wow. What do you do? I think we're in the midst of that right now. People are no longer trusting media. In the notion of what is truthful has been under attack. In sort of the mainstream for a while, so I can't answer that. I just know that we're seeing it playing out in real time in recent years, particularly in America.
But I mean, Mary, if you try to communicate something to a student, say one on
Right.
one, and they
Yeah.
go, "Oh, they don't get it." What do
Hmm.
you do? I mean,
Well, what do I do?
yeah,
I guess I try and with my teaching, I try and connect to what they know. So, for instance, when I'm introducing Irish literature and Irish culture, I always include a discussion of Irish America and join the dots with what in the history led people to go to America and then how that sort of returns again. So I guess I always try and figure out what they do know.
yeah,
And we keep pushing until we get there, until I
yeah.
see this micro expression where I'm like, okay, finally we're there. And of course, I speak a different dialect of English. I bring a different baggage, cultural baggage,
Yeah.
So I always say to my students of the Hiberno English dialect, the dialect of the English spoken in Ireland, that it is haunted by the ghost of the Irish language. So I really get that notion that language sort of carries, history and culture and so on. So I do understand there will be gaps at times. And but I think particularly for teaching Irish literature to American students, a great bridge is to always sort of try and think through the diaspora as well, particularly the diaspora in the Americas.
It's very, very good, Mary. So your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Sorry, I missed the first one. Are we more thinking beings?
Thinking or more feeling? Are we more head or more heart?
I think we're more feeling, but some of us are under the illusion that we're more thinking.
Yeah. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One,
oh, cool.
Is thinking a function of the soul?
It's so interesting to hear the word soul used. People don't use that anymore unless they're explicitly religious. I guess what did Turing mean by the soul? I don't know his writings.
Right, but I mean in general.
In general.
In me and you, we could, like Lily Tomlin says, reality is a collective hunch.
Yeah.
Language is a collective hunch. And most people, a lot of people react to that question the same way you. They go, well, it depends on what you mean by the soul. Well, we kind of know a general feeling what we mean by the soul.
So he means a more intuitive side, I suppose. Right?
Maybe he does. I think that, again, you're putting him into the context you want. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just like whatever your hunch is.
Yeah. So what's the phrase again? Thinking is
thinking a function of the soul. That's
an extraordinary thing for somebody who invented computers or whatever he did to sad. Thinking a function of the soul. You see, there I am. I'm sort of saying that all, people, intellectuals over-intellectualize, and I'm just hung up on this word soul,
Yeah, because maybe, Mary, this is what some people go, no, thinking's a function of the brain. But, can you separate the brain from the soul? Because that's actually, let's go to the next question because it'll come full circle.
Yeah.
Your observations. Oh, no, I already asked you that. Are we more feeling, more thinking? Okay. No, the next question is Turing. Can machines think?
Can machines think? It may be that we'll find out that they can on some level at some point, because I think that there are things we don't understand. Like, for instance, this is going to be a ridiculous anecdote, but when I was in college, I had a faulty fridge that would misbehave. And I would walk over to it and say in a really loud voice, if you don't start working again, I'm going to throw you out. And it would always start working. So I don't know what to do with that.
Right. No, that's great. And look at, I like when I said I welcome anecdotes, and then you said this is going to be a ridiculous anecdote. The anecdotes I most welcome are the ridiculous ones. I want
What
people
my fridge could think, how's that? And could feel, and could be fearful.
Yeah, because people like to call their, car or their cell phone a name. And
Right.
but here's Turing said another interesting thing. What we want is a machine that can learn from experience. So, I mean, how many times has Chatbox have been asked, can you think? And what does Chatbox say? I don't know, but that would be very interesting to see what it says. So, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I'm not trustful of the word happiness. I think contentment is a better word. I think that happiness is maybe what's marketed to us as sort of the state we should achieve at all times, and we're failing if we don't. So I prefer contentment. But anyway, I've got hung up on one word again. Can you tell me what?
That's amazing, Mary. A lot of people change. Now, this is what I want you to feel throughout our conversation.
Okay.
It's me and you versus the wording on the questions. So I'm for people changing. And you'd be amazed how many people, when I say, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning? They change the word happiness to either joy or contentment.
Oh, really? Wow.
But again, I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he says happiness doesn't tend to last, and meaning does tend to last.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you have to pursue one or the other. It's just an interesting observation.
Well, for me, I suppose when I'm pursuing meaning, I'm content. So I don't see them as different,
Yeah, they're not different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it, or are we more so creating it?
I have to think about that one, but I guess something I read recently that would be where I would go to think this through is that they now have, and this is what I suppose my sense of, we don't have the technology to really understand everything that's going on in many ways, but they recently have the technology to monitor people in the hours after they die. And it seems like there's a massive amount of brain activity going on when somebody is what used to be thought of as dead, technically dead. So that is really incredible to me. I don't know what to make of it, but that's where I'd go. I would go and read a lot about that in order to answer
Did you recall, did they say 7 minutes or an hour? Did they give any?
It depended on the person. Some people, I think it was up to an hour or two.
Wow.
That's incredible. And also a little terrifying, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because if everybody's sort of talking about the embalming arrangements as you're like lying there listening to them, that's pretty terrifying.
Well, I'm going to ask you another question in that regard, but it's funny because Tim Leary says, if you learn how to lucid dream, then for 7 minutes after your physical body dies, you can kind of direct your path because your brain or your consciousness is still sort of working. That's really interesting what you said. And then the New Yorker posed this question in recent months. Can the baby inside the mother's womb dream, or is dreaming dependent on experience outside the womb? Now, your hunch, do you think the baby can dream inside the womb, or you have to be outside the womb and have experience first?
I think probably in the very late stages of pregnancy, when everything has sort of evolved and developed, I think probably yes, because they are existing in there. They are responding to stimuli. I have a daughter, and my husband used to play her pop music from Mali when she was kicking too much, and she would calm down. And we found that when she was born and she was upset and we played that same pop song, she would calm down. So she was listening to that music in utero. So yeah,
That
I
is
think.
so cool. Now,
Mm.
Mali is African music?
Yeah, it was it has a really great music culture. It's one of the
That
great
is so
pieces of
cool.
music. Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
Frank Lloyd Wright's mother wanted him to be an architect, so she put up pictures of buildings in the room while she was pregnant. It's like, yeah,
Wow.
right. Did it leak?
That's brilliant.
Yeah, did it leak through the skin of the mother's pregnant body, or did
Wow.
her mind go through? Did it go through her mind and go into the baby? You know, it's
Yeah.
endless. I think it's the nature nurture thing, which I ask
Well,
a lot.
again, I suppose I'm getting to this notion that science is slowly bolstering our intuitions a lot, because that sense that, say, his mother had, one of the most shocking things, not shocking, that implies it was negative. It was actually positive, but one of the most intriguing things I read about pregnancy is that the mother forever has the cells of the child, some of the cells of the child in her body long after the child has been born.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that blew my mind.
that's amazing. So that's my two favorite things are Robin Williams, the comedian. He says he calls it womb service.
Wounds.
When you're in the womb, it's womb service, and then and then Captain Beefheart, great singer, said, I when he came out, he says, "I'm going back in. I don't want to come out." You know,
Well, people who claim to remember their births say things like that.
they do. Yeah. Okay. So, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Probably depends on the person. There are probably a handful of people in the world whose speed of thought is faster than light, but I'm not one of them.
There's a poet, Audre Lorde. She said, "You
Oh
can't."
yeah.
Yeah, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne
Mhm.
Rainer, her colleague, said, yes, you can if you expose the tools. What
Yeah.
new tool do you suggest?
What new tool? I suppose. Well, the first thing I'm going to respond to what she said, because I often, whenever I read that phrase, which I love, it reminds me of what all the great Irish writers like Wilde and Joyce and so on said about why the Irish are so good at writing. And for them, it was about taking the colonial master's language and using it better, you know, than anyone else, was a kind of a way of taking control. But you said, sorry, I keep forgetting. What was
No, that's
that?
good. No, yeah, because they use the master's tool
Yeah,
to get over on the master. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
But
that's a
I've
good.
forgotten the second part of your question as
But
usual.
then Yvonne Rainer says, no, it's to expose the tool. Basically, Mary, the question is, what tool do you gravitate towards? Then if you want to add new to it, that's fine. And if you want to add to dismantling the master's house, that's fine.
New tool. No, I mean, I think language remains,
Yeah,
at least in the Irish literature context, it remains
yeah.
the ever new tool. I mean, we continue to produce amazing, creative writers who push the boundaries of what can be done, generation after generation in Ireland.
Yeah. No, that's actually an answer I get often is language.
Yeah.
Okay, now the follow-up is, what new toy do you suggest?
Boy.
TOY.
Yeah. New toy. I don't think toys need to be new.
But then any toy. What's a toy you gravitate towards?
Really interesting. I didn't really play with toys as a kid. Is that weird? So I never played with dolls or, I guess I was a reader from a young age. So books, how's that?
There you go. That is a great answer, because I think, like Mallarmé says, everything ends up in a book. Books are the coolest thing in the world. Come on. Okay, what
There
do you
are
worry?
books that are chew toys, I guess. So
Yeah.
maybe that one.
Okay, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Worry about. You know what I do? I listen to podcasts and I listen to really interesting people, and then I don't hear that worried voice in my head at all.
Yes,
Mm.
that's good.
Yeah. I listen to Arts and Ideas and This American Life and Front Row. I've got a whole litany of usually on science and culture and literature, just the latest podcasts. And I love it. Keeps me sane.
Yeah, so McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. And I mean writers, painters, artists in general are they're broadcasting and detecting the
Yes.
hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So
Yes.
we might learn to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Mary, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why do we ignore it? I guess they are often telling us, aren't they, uncomfortable truths,
Yeah.
And that's again, I suppose, I'm going back to Joyce with this, because I think Joyce broadcasts some truths that still aren't properly acknowledged. One of the great themes we always pluck out when I teach Dubliners to my undergraduates is that Joyce is very conscious of what we can only call children's rights in those stories. That children are very much put upon by adults who have power over them in those stories. And we have names for all the isms, sexism, racism, and so on, but we don't have a mainstream term to describe that powerlessness that children has, that he was so aware of in those stories. It's so central to those stories. So I think we still disenfranchise children hugely. We either, I think in our current culture, we're helicoptering them too much, and it's not good. But there's always, some extreme treatment for children. They're either neglected or they're overparented, and I feel like they'd be happier if we could somehow find some happy medium. But Joyce was terrifically aware of this. And one thing I read about him, and I suppose it must have been Ellman's biography, was that his very intellectual, sophisticated, thoughtful peer writers and artists used to laugh at him because he refused to punish his children physically. They thought this was hilarious. And of course, again, he was ahead of the times by about a century in doing that, or not doing that. So I think people ignore him, or ignore that kind of prophetic voice in a way, because it would take too much to upend the way things are done to actually take account of people who can see how it should be done.
Yeah. Mary, let me just clarify. So I heard this right. You're saying his peers would laugh at him because he spanked his kids, or
no, because he refused to. He
would
didn't
not
believe,
spank his.
yeah,
He would not spank. Yeah, that's what I
he
thought.
said he didn't believe in the physical punishment of children. Yeah. And in the era in which he said that, people thought that was just hilarious, that, it's necessary to beat a child for them to turn out well.
Yeah, I was hoping you were going to say it that way. And then that's the
follow-up. You
follow-up.
can't imagine Joyce hitting a child at all.
Yeah. No, he just stared at Lucia dancing around and goes, dude, I'm going to write Finnegan's Wake from you dancing freeform like Martha Graham and the Grateful Dead. I mean, I love that he's just sitting there going, wow, right. in awe of her freedom, Actually, this is funny because I interviewed yesterday a lady who's called a neurodivergent artist.
Okay.
And there's a YouTube video, was Joyce crazy? And people have that theory, syphilis causing me crazy. And, they go, oh, Ulysses is the greatest book ever. But then Evan Finnegan's Wake, he went too far, and blah, 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 all that. But it's like, it's an amazing term, neurodivergent, because it's like, well, everybody's neurally divergent.
Everybody, exactly.
But
Joyce
they
just had an
wanna use,
extreme brain, that's
yeah,
all.
they
He
want
just
to use it as this term to like cool out on saying, like, because my sister's social worker, she told me that term like 8 years ago. I said, well, what are we supposed to call it now? Because you couldn't call it special needs, emotional disability. They're like, no, don't say that, But anyways, it's very interesting because I think he was someone who went with his hunch. Is like, no, I'm not going to hit my kids, you
Mhm,
know.
mhm, yeah.
So, do artists have moral obligation?
No, and not necessarily. I mean, it's
Really?
always the issue, isn't it, of
Wow.
separating the artist from their art, right?
Yeah.
Um, no, I think their obligation is to their own vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right.
I
Isn't
passed.
that, Mary, everybody says, when everybody says yes, every human has moral obligation. And a lot of people say to themselves. But I like it when people are bold enough to say no, because they think, how could, because I like artists that do things that are horrible, but I know I can separate the art from the artist, and I'm not condoning, but I
Right.
mean, anyways.
Yeah.
Um,
I've read enough biographies of writers to know that most humans are very flawed, regardless of what kind of genius works they produce, and that's fine.
that's fine. That's human. That's
Yeah.
Frank Zappa's great line. He said, "I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure."
Who said that?
Frank Zappa,
That's really good.
who listed James Joyce as an influence in his first album in late mid '60s.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I don't make a distinction between them. I think that the old ideas get evolved and
Yeah.
developed and returned to. So I don't see a distinction, and I'm not afraid of any of them.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yes, but my mother had to decipher it for me. My grandfather, apparently, I was close to him. He was my father's father, and so they were very a similar personality, very calm kind of people. And I was very fond of him, apparently. And I have, I didn't realize I had a memory of him, but one day I said to my mother, "Gosh, I have this distinct, like almost like a Polaroid of this bow-legged old man in a garden." And of course, that was very distinctive, to be bow-legged. And she said, "Oh, that was your grandfather." And so I had remembered like a snapshot, but had not remembered who it was, strangely. And he died. I think I was less than 2 when he died. Yeah, and I cried all night apparently. So
Wow, that's heavy, because that's another great Joyce line, "Love thy label as thyself." Like, again, well, why do we have to invent names for everybody? Because we got to distinguish, because really you've studied this history of Irish literature, but you can go, oh, Wilde or Joyce or that other guy you've been talking about. I mean, it's amazing, but in essence, it's more like, what is this thing called Irish literature? You know,
mm.
and how important is it for us to distinguish, names? Is the influence he had on you, is that lived more than his actual name in your brain?
Joyce, you mean?
Well, no, I was saying your grandfather.
Oh, my grandfather. Sorry, for some
Yeah,
reason, because we're talking about Irish literature.
yeah.
Um, sorry, I was thinking we were talking about
No,
Joyce.
that's all right. It was, I jumped, I did a non sequitur there.
Right,
Any,
right, okay.
but Mary, do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
It depends on person's experience,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Um, Obviously, for some people, it is a curse. Though it's intriguing that the mind has ways of then suppressing the worst kind of memories for some people. But for me, I guess I'm a regular human in that it's a mixture of both. But I feel like we learn from, unless it's been a really overwhelmingly bad experience, we tend to learn from our mistakes at times, not always, but at times.
Yeah.
I just think it's just as I would refute the word happiness as a kind of an extreme state that we shouldn't aim for all the time. I think that it's necessary to incorporate negative memories and experiences and think about them, and just incorporate them into yourself. So a mixture of both, I think, is
both
unavoidable. It's unavoidable.
Very good, Mary. And tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
I'm laughing because I publish creative writing a little bit as well, and I never told my cousin this, but she's there's a character in one of the short stories who's based loosely on her. So she was extremely irreverent. She taught me how to smoke cigarettes at 13. Luckily, I unlearned that fairly fast. But she was that kind of role model. I was from a family of 2 boys, so she was basically my substitute, my standing sister, in that I didn't have a sister. So she kind of functioned as that, and she was sort of an anti-role model, I suppose, by sort of normative standards. But I appreciate it very much because I didn't have an older sister to tell me all the things that my mother wouldn't tell me about. So Maura, I've even named her now. Gosh, hope she doesn't see this. Would be that person.
What was her life? What did she do for her career then?
Oh, she had a perfectly good career. She ends up working for a health service, an Irish government health service, and has a very successful career and a lovely husband. So she ended up fine. She's just she was very smart and very strong-willed, and she did what she wanted.
That's beautiful.
So Maura, it's all good. You're listening.
Well, I really appreciate it. They go, well, I learned honesty from my mom and hard work from my dad. And it's like, no, I learned how to smoke cigarettes from my cousin.
And if my daughter's looking at this, I didn't smoke them for long. Okay.
Hey, that's what I appreciate. I really want people to be bare bone honest with me and not use their stock lines, like go a little deeper. So I really appreciate it, Mary. And then outside your immediate family, same question.
I guess it will be 2 women, a mother and a daughter. So the rural area I lived in was kind of fairly homogenous, and people were very conservative, and they would use those kind of, as you said, expected phrases when asked questions. And then this family moved from Dublin, and the mother was a working class, self-proclaimed feminist, and her kids were like straight talking kids who would make demands and speak their truths and speak their needs in a way that us sort of country kids had not been taught to do. And I was kind of in awe of the whole family. And so the daughter has become one of my longest term friends. We're still in touch all the time. We still meet when I go to Ireland. And the mother became my role model. She was, by the standards of the area, she was absolutely outrageous and rebellious. And I thought she was wonderful. And she died relatively young, and I still miss her.
So cool. Yeah. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Catholic-ish, I suppose. Yeah. But not, I think I lived in a really interesting time, and you were very widely read. So I'll put this to you because I've never been able to figure it out. But I was growing up in the 80s into the 90s, and I remember we were kind of given this surface, shallow schooling in religion, and it felt very rote. And I found that my whole generation and after sort of stopped believing, and I don't understand what happened in that period. Why people suddenly, Ireland became extremely secular from about that point on. And Ireland is still culturally Catholic, right? And I have Jewish friends who totally get this, like this notion of being culturally Jewish without being, religious. And I think you could say right now Irish culture is culturally Catholic to a huge extent. Obviously, Ireland is very diverse and has plenty of people, and there've always been plenty of people who are not Catholic in Ireland. But I don't understand where I've never read a history that explains to me that psychic earthquake that everybody experienced at about the same time in Ireland. That meant that my parents and their generation, who were absolute believers, right, unquestioning, our generation were like, oh, for God's sake, in our own heads, even as we were taking, religious instruction class. And my mother-in-law is a really interesting, thoughtful person who really sort of sits back and thinks about things a lot. And she's taken classes in philosophy in her retirement and so on, and religion. And I said to her once, because I was trying to really think about their world, my parents and my parents-in-law's world as they grew up in Ireland. And I said to her, what's your earliest memory of, your memory of the emotion you felt in relation to religion? And she said her earliest memory in that regard was age about 7, and it was fear. She was fearful that she would inadvertently commit a sin, and she was even more fearful that somebody would discover her sin and expose her. And so, in other words, and that was fascinating to me because my generation and after, for the most part, don't seem to have internalized that fear in any way. And yet, that was a shocking I think, insight into what it was like to be raised in a kind of religious monoculture where religion really dominated everyday life and behavior and so on. It was very hard to be a child in that culture.
So well put, Mary. And I'm going to address it in a second, but I want to ask you this first. Do you pray?
Occasionally, but I'm not sure what I'm praying to. For me, prayer is it's what we mean by prayer now. It's this major religion practice directed at a God. I believe that humans have always done that. They've always gone off and sort of spoken intensely to themselves at moments of sort of anxiety and hope and so on. And I suppose the way I do it, I think it's a more instinctive practice that humans would have done always, possibly before organized religion, that it's a way of kind of going deep inside yourself and trying to sort of calibrate and trying to understand what you need and whether you should need it. I don't like conventional prayer that we were taught, which was like, ask God for a favor, it should be more than that,
Really good, Mary, because here's one person I asked, do you pray? And she goes, yeah, for parking spaces. And I love that answer. But what I dropped from that, I used to say, were you raised a particular religion? When or did you ever check out? And then do you pray? But I dropped the middle question because everybody said they dropped out between 12 and 15. And it was like, okay, they want to do what you were trying to sum up. They got to that age, maybe it was in the 60s, we were going to be liberated from, authority. And it was because they saw the flaws in organized religion. We didn't know priests were raping kids or whatever. But this is like, to me, I never did that. I never really checked out. I'm a fluke of my generation because I'm 70. All my friends, like, I don't, and then they always want to go, I'm spiritual, not religious. Right. So I like how you suss that out because there was a change. And I think it's along with feminism, which I've supported all along, but I think the pill was a problem in a lot of ways, but it wasn't a problem. I mean, my mom was a Roman Catholic and she was a nurse in our town in Michigan. And she says, no, I'm going to work for Planned Parenthood. Man, that was against her religion. Right. So it was like, I appreciated what I was taught, but we would still go to church together because it was the ritual of doing something together with the family.
Yeah.
And it is an amazing thing, because here's the next question. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think it's rare, but I do think there are some genuinely evil people. And that's a really good question, because I guess you're asking if, that would have been the old notion of the devil, isn't it, of Satan, that there's a force in the world that some people fall subject to. I think most of the time, evil can be, what becomes evil can be explained by somebody who's very damaged. But I think there are exceptions. There are some people who behave in really evil ways, and there's no discernible reason why they're behaving that way. And that, I suppose, is the conundrum. Then, are those rare people? Just as I think extremely good people are equally rare too.
But it is, you're saying what a lot of people say. Everybody's capable of being evil, and everybody's capable of being good.
Well, yes, but I think there's a few outliers who are able to be extremely good or extremely evil. And as I said, sometimes that's explicable and sometimes it's not. Can I tell you something interesting that's just occurred to me?
Please.
I met Seamus Heaney once. I was at the University of Notre Dame, Indiana, for a postdoc, and he was invited there, and I was lucky enough to go up to dinner in a very small group with him. And this is really, really hard to explain, but he seemed saintly. He had an aura that was really good. And when he looked at you and spoke to you, you really felt seen. It was extraordinary. I mean, it was sort of like how I imagined the Dalai Lama or the Pope or something. It was extraordinary and unexpected. I mean, I respected him as a writer, but I didn't expect this sense of wisdom, I suppose. And I've read about that without hardly ever encountering it before. But Seamus Heaney had whatever that is, that quality. Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. And again, that's what I appreciate, is how people can illustrate their thoughts on these questions with a story or something. Because this is, Mary, really the hidden question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. A basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think JFK's got it right. You acknowledge them without letting them under your skin enough to, disrupt you in any way, but you don't forget. I think JFK's attitude is incredibly Irish, actually.
That is
don't
good.
Forget, Marlon. We have a long memory.
It's like my favorite Irish thing is this a private fight or can anyone join in? But that was good. But I mean, like, if your daughter's bullied, what would you say to her?
I would try and give her a sense of perspective, because we've come up against, somewhat those issues. I won't go into detail, but I try and give her a sense of perspective as to where she will be in a few years. That sense of you're in the maelstrom now. That person isn't going to go anywhere because they are, bullies. There are people who bully others. They have a very limited vision, and so ultimately you will triumph over that person because you will blossom and you will succeed and they never will. And I think that helped her a little, that kind of perspective of it's really bad now, but in the long term, if you can try and imagine, it'll be okay and you will ultimately win.
So this is Nassim Taleb. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. And my friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, says, the criminal gets caught. Does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. The basic question is, does punishment work?
Does punishment work? Can I just go back to the heroes thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
See, that's
I have a problem with that word. And again, I suppose it's my Irish perspective, because I think the hero is sort of the lead character in history written by the vanquisher, you know. Who gets to define a hero? From whose point of view is a person heroic? I guess would be my response to that.
Yeah. Who gets to define the hero is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, again, someone says, oh, you're a hero. Oh, but just say, take somebody like Robin Hood. Oh, I'm going to steal from the poor to give to the, I'm going to steal from the rich to give to the poor. But hey, society says don't steal. It's not good. But I'm doing something good. You know,
okay. So my response to that would be there would have been a whole cohort of society who would have thought that the sheriff was the hero. The sheriff who arrested Robin Hood or attempted to arrest him.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. Now,
yeah.
When I asked that to that neurodivergent artist the other day, she goes, I'm not into, I think you should dismantle the whole police system. And then go to Blake. William Blake said, okay, Lenny Bruce said, you can call cops 3 things: cops, pigs, or peace officers. Well, why not call them peace officers? Because that's what you want them to do, is keep the peace. And William Blake says, we become what we behold. So, you know, that's the thing. If we say, oh, they're an enemy of the people, then you're turning that person into, you're making them not a human. You're saying, oh, they're an enemy. So, I mean, in the long run, does punishment work? In fact, look at that.
The core question is, does punishment work?
Yeah.
I think in an unequal society, no, because again, it's a case of why did that person commit that crime? And aside from the kind of inexplicably evil, rare person, I think most people's resort to crime can be explained by their background in some way. Yeah. So I think, yes, people can be punished if we live in a completely evil or in a completely equal society. Then, but we don't. You know?
We don't. Look at Mary, this skateboard philosopher in Venice told me when I asked him that, the word enemy. That's the word enemy. Words evoke more than their meaning. So as soon as you name them, then they become an enemy. So it's enemy. It was amazing, like how words operate on another level almost.
That's great. That's very Joycean. You said that was a skateboarder?
Very Joyce.
That's fantastic. That could be from Very Good Wink.
Well, I loved it because it was a skateboard philosopher, and I was like, "Whoa!" You know, he was
a skateboard philosopher. Is this is very California?
Well, it's just like a kind of a transient homeless person who rides a skateboard around Venice. You know,
hey, wow,
a beach bum. You know,
right? Yeah, yeah, that's amazing.
Okay, so here we get to James Joyce. First projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago, Volta Cinema, allegedly checked out. He says, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Then Faulkner says years later, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
So that just reminds me of the best answer I ever heard a teacher give. So I did art history in school, and it was mostly the girls in the year who would take the art class. And some guys had this attitude that it was an easy class, you know, and it was like a way of not having to do much work, and they'd enroll in it for that reason. So we got one of those guys in, and he was just being really sort of disruptive. And the teacher shut him down with this explanation one day. And after that, he really engaged. It was so interesting. She was showing us slides of Picasso, the progress of Picasso's art. And it went from old school representative art representation to, you know, it became more and more abstract. And in the end, we had looked at a sort of a very early drawing of his, of a very recognizably a horse, a sort of classical kind of representation of a horse. And then we ended up with the really abstract later career Picasso. And the guy who had enrolled in the class thinking it was easy put up his hand and was like, oh, well, I prefer the horse. What the hell is the point of sort of showing us these lines later on and telling us that's a horse when that earlier representation is recognizably a horse? Like, that's art, you know. And she said to him, look at the dates of these pictures. Photography has been invented. Photography is getting popular. If you want to see what a horse looks like, you can look at a photograph of it all of a sudden, right? Everybody has access to photographs now. You don't need to act like a camera if you're an artist anymore. And he was really silent. And after that, he engaged in the class. It was really interesting.
That is so good. It brought up two things that I'd love to tell you, Mary. That was really good. Again, this is how you answer these questions with stories and illustrate your life, because I started in art history too. That's how I got philosophical. And you have to see the film. It's not free on YouTube. You might even require students. It's only 45 minutes.
What's it called?
It's by Marty Scorsese.
Oh,
and it's basically how cinema affected Cubism and how Cubism affected cinema. It's like both of them. So, I mean, they put aside, but the real one I want to tell you is a German government official is touring the art studios in Paris when Picasso's painting, he's finishing Guernica in his studio. And the German walks in and he looks at the painting and he says to Picasso, did you do that? And Picasso goes, no, you did. So, you know, I mean, if you could just walk us through briefly, what's your tipping point to become, because are you basically a nonfiction writer and an educator? Are that your two roles? Or what would you call it?
I've published a handful of short stories over my career, creative writing, but mainly,
so you've written fiction, but you're mainly nonfiction.
Mainly nonfiction.
And an
educator, yeah. And okay. I guess I do scholarly books, but then I've published a bit in places like the Irish Times. So I try and do more mainstream accessible articles as well. So a little bit of that, more of that increasingly, actually, because I find that it has more impact than scholarly work, to be honest.
You know what McLuhan said, a great line. He says, you can't write, this is in the 70s, you can't write the great American novel, because the great American novel is the front page of the newspaper. That is it. I mean, now when I open my email, AOL gives me a bunch of news. I was like, I don't want news, but you can't avoid seeing it. So that's
right.
But where's that tipping point? Did you go to art studios, or I mean art museums growing up and go, oh, I want to study art history? Where's your tipping point to go to school and study art history, then study literature, and then be an educator? The tipping point.
This is, remember I said to you, sometimes I have to effectively translate my way of speaking English to my students to make them understand. I just use the word school in the way Irish and British people use it to mean secondary level. I know in the US, of course, it's often used at university. So when I say I studied art history, it was in high school that I studied it.
Wow.
Yeah.
By
So,
choice, or did your
oh,
parents?
by choice. No, by
So
choice.
what's the tipping point? Where's you go, oh, I like art, I'm going to study art history. How did you develop that aesthetic?
I guess because we had the World Book Encyclopedia series, and the section on art had something like 100 pages of color reproductions of all the high points, according to, you know, mainstream art criticism at the time. So I would look at those over and over again. I was very, I've always been very visual, and I've ended up being a scholar of fashion as well. I am very visual. I love textile history and so on. So I think that really, I guess I looked at it all the time until I knew every painting by sight. And I nearly went to art college.
To become an artist, you mean a fine artist, like drawing or painting?
I don't know what I was going to end up doing. I was just thinking of maybe applying to NCAD in Dublin, the National College of Art and Design. Yeah, well, you can do lots of things there. You can be a clothes designer. You can be yeah. But I did.
Let me just comment on World Book for a second, because to me, I grew up with World Book Encyclopedia too. And when Wikipedia first started, my friend said, "Oh, you can't. We don't allow." He's a teacher in high school. He says, "We don't allow kids to use Wikipedia." I go, "What do you mean? All we did as kids was go to World Book Encyclopedia and copy it. You know, I mean, that was our Wikipedia." And then people go, "Well, Wikipedia, anybody can enter it." Well, anybody. Who got the jobs to write World Book Encyclopedia? We believed that World Book Encyclopedia was accurate, and it was pretty good, and so is Wikipedia pretty good. But both of them could have mistakes. So I love that whole sensibility of World Book and Encyclopedia.
Oh, by the way, one of the first scholarly publications I did, I won't name the location or even the writer, but it was a reasonably well-known writer. And I decided I would write an literary encyclopedia entry on them because I'd been working on them anyway. And I got to see how the sausage was made, you know. There I was, a not very experienced grad student, acting like I was the final word on this person. And I was like, you know. And at least at literary encyclopedia level, it's often beginning grad students who write those entries. I'm not saying they don't know their stuff, but you know, encyclopedias are as fallible as anything else, you know.
Yeah. Well, they dig this. The guy who invented Wikipedia whitewashes his own entry. And my friend was making my Wikipedia entry. It took him a year to do I mean, he really is diligent at it, but then he entered it and they go, nope, because a couple of them, the sources, the footnotes didn't work for their standards. So, I mean, it was like, it's very interesting that you said that. But so then where is it? You might have went to art school. So then where did you go? Well, I want to be did you first say, I want to write books about literature and then pursue that? Or did you go, I want to be a teacher, and it fell into writing?
So I did my undergraduate at Trinity College in Dublin, and it's a 4-year program, which is unusual in Ireland. It's usually a 3-year degree in the arts in Ireland. And the 4th year, you were supposed to, it was almost like a stepping stone to a master's. You could, I think, effectively get out a master's a few years later if you did the paperwork. But the 4th year, you were meant to produce, you know, the equivalent of a small dissertation or thesis.
Yeah.
And I'd never done anything like that before. I tended to write the standard short papers in every class. And I had been an okay student. I hadn't pushed myself hugely until I got to this massive project that I had to do. And I realized that I was much happier doing a complicated, involved, long piece of writing than a short, pithy response paper. And I found my métier. And I then went to live in Japan and work in Japan for 2 years, and from Japan, I applied to grad school. So at the beginning, it was a very short vision. It was me just wanting to do research and write in depth about literary matters. And it was while I was in grad school, I went to Queen's in Belfast because I wanted to live on the other side of the Irish border. If I was going to be thinking about Irish culture and identity and history, I thought it was super important to do that, you know, to sort of to live there too. So I went to Queen's in Belfast, and while I was there, I applied for a postdoc at Notre Dame, Indiana, and I went there. And it was that slow, gradual process. When I arrived in America, I could see there were many more opportunities, you know. And so I didn't have some grand plan. I didn't even have a plan to move to America. I always say I'm the only Irish immigrant who's kind of accidentally become an Irish immigrant. And, you know, I didn't intend to move to America. It just worked out that way. Once I arrived here for the year, it seemed like a pretty good fit. So no great plan.
But where's that tipping point to be an educator?
An educator. I guess when I was in Japan, I was working in classrooms. I was the role was it was a Department of Education in Japan program. They would place recent graduates in classrooms with English teachers from Japan, Japanese English teachers, and you would be like their native speaker assistant. And I guess I that was the first time I assisted in the role of teaching, and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed they were like senior high school age, and they were good fun. I enjoyed it, and you know, to this day I love teaching young adults that age. They're just not fully formed, but they still have a, you know, so many possibilities. You know, that they're still open to the world and open to experience. Well, I love them that age.
Is this college you're teaching, or high school?
So in Japan it was high school, but they were like, most of the time they were like in their senior year and so on. So that's close enough in age to, you know, the kids I'm teaching now. That it was a great experience. So that was some of it. And then when I was applying to grad school, I knew that I could handle the teaching part, or I'd be interested in handling it based on that experience. Yeah.
We got about 20 more minutes and my battery's just going low, so I'm going to move inside so we don't get cut off.
But you have a nice garden.
Yes, I'm lucky. So we can keep talking. Basically, the next question is about intention, and I'm curious. A screenwriting teacher taught me that, or he said to me that great art is great film, great book is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. And Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker.
Yeah.
Let's go on two points. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a book or say an article for the Irish Times? And then what role does intention play when you're teaching?
Okay, so I guess with me, I like to, I'm just looking at my book here. My book is Race, Politics in Irish America. So I was approaching a very tricky conversation potentially, you know, with that. I was thinking about where the Irish fit in the American complex of race, both as victims, but also as kind of perpetrators. So I think it's a multifaceted history. And so I had to, I think, sort of lay out my argument really neutrally and really carefully with lots of evidence, because of the tricky nature of what I was saying for the potential readers of this book, who would be people who maybe wanted to be reading an ethnic pride volume, which is, I was trying to do something more complicated than that. So I guess for me, my approach is to, if I'm doing something complicated like that, is to slowly build up so that the intention is revealed and sort of is a culmination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. And then as a teacher, because it's, you can be creative. Because I mean, did you go to school to teach you how to teach, or did they just go, oh, go teach because you've been in the classroom? That's what all the educators I interview say. No one ever taught us how to teach, but actually one person said, no, they taught us how to teach. But you've been involved in teachers teaching you your whole life, so it's like in-house training. But what role does intention play? Because you talked about how much fun you have. It's good fun. What's your intention creatively with the students? Yeah.
So I guess I'll backtrack and say, in the Irish and the UK system, you weren't. Maybe it's changed now. It may have changed in recent years. But when I was there, you were not taught to teach. It was assumed you knew how. You were also given classes, undergraduate classes, small undergraduate classes as a grad student to teach. So you were thrown in the deep end a little bit. Though I did have a wonderful mentor there who took it upon herself to help me out. But in the American system, at least at UConn, there is very much an intention to guide graduate students in teaching. So I think in the American system, it's more common, and certainly in a program like UConn, it's very much to the forefront of how students are trained, and it actually helps them get a lot of jobs, to be honest. But what is my intention? I guess I'm going to go back to one of the things I said early on is I intend to make the unfamiliar familiar by trying to join the dots always to what students might know if I'm introducing something unfamiliar. So I always try to convey, for instance, the sort of the deep sectarianism of Northern Irish culture, where people constantly try and categorize each other as either Protestant or Catholic traditionally, to try and imagine what that feels like. And I always say to students, imagine the South in the Jim Crow era, where people were absolutely, they had to fix somebody racially. They had to, especially if somebody was ambiguous racially, the person addressing them was uneasy until they were sure what race this person was. And so I try to explain to them that way. I said, you can imagine that. I think you have some sense of that. Well, that's what the sectarianism was like in Northern Ireland. It absolutely permeated the way people perceived each other and categorized each other, And yeah,
it sounds like you. Tell me if this is what you're saying. Top down, it's divide and conquer.
Are you talking about teaching?
No, not you
No.
teaching. What you what you were trying to teach them, that there's this
yeah, that it's the danger of categorization, that it's the danger of assuming things about somebody based on their category and being uneasy until you put them in that box, because you can't fix them. And by the way, for anyone who wants to understand that mentality, traditional mentality in Northern Ireland, Anna Burns's Milkman is a fantastic novel. It won the Booker in recent years.
Good suggestion. And so Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your book or writing your article for the Irish Times?
I guess with a newspaper, you're sure of readership. That's the good thing about it, For a scholarly work, it's trickier. I think that you have to you assume, you hope, you're optimistic that you'll have many readers. But for an academic publication, you have to do a lot of the legwork yourself to promote that work. And I've been told by fiction writers that increasingly there's tiny budgets in traditional publishing as well for fiction writers. So fiction writers themselves are also, unless they're top flight, are also having to do that kind of promo. So I always, I wrote something in my intro, if I can find the last line, about my readership. I had a note right at the end of my tiny intro, if I can find it. Of course, I won't be able to now. Yeah, I said this book considers various Irish, Irish-American, African-American, and American histories, identities, and cultural productions, and aims for multiple readerships. To that end, endnotes or descriptors may sometimes detail events or figures that seem too well known for such treatment, but that may be the case. That may be the case for only one portion of the intended readership. So I was trying to bear in mind that a book about race in Irish America would, I hope, attract various readers who may not all have the same canon of famous names in their head, you know. So I didn't assume any knowledge.
Yeah. Really good, Mary. I got about 2 more questions, and I hope we can do a part 2 somewhere down the line, like 3 or 4 months, because we just sort of broke a little into some of this. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like a knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. And maybe religion or philosophy, non-tangible, extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? You know, whether it's a keyboard or a pen, what humanness does the writing utensil extend for you?
I guess it helps me to clarify and make connections. I in my writing, I try to take seemingly disparate things and show their connectedness and show you know, sort of the deep history that, say, the Irish brought with them to America. You know, that there's reverberations of what they bring, both for themselves and for the others that they encounter in the Americas. So I guess with my writing, like I had numerous topics and figures, there's dozens of figures in my book. So I effectively wrote standalone pieces about each of them and then stood back and said, well, what is it about all these figures that fascinate me, you know? And it was that they had some connection to Ireland in some way, regardless of their religion or their race, and that mattered in some way to them, and that they dealt with it in their art in some way that hasn't been recognized in some way. So I went in and I sort of embroidered the connections between them. But at first it seemed disparate, and I really thought about it. And that book took me 10 years. So it took a lot of kind of threading together to sort of make those connections. But for me, it helped me. So I suppose for me, I think on the page to a certain extent too. At least I clarify my thinking on the page.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love this. The first thing was, what's the best thing for a human being? To recognize or be aware of a weakness or a mistake, you know, and how can you deal with it? So this is McLuhan in 1957 said, it's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. Good laughing. Listen to the rest of this, because it's all bullshit, but it sounds good. This distinction merely relieves people the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up the distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Now, Marshall's usually not the type who says something definite, but he's sort of saying, you know, is there a difference between entertainment and education? But the main line I'd like you to address, if you could, is whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So, you know, how do you calculate what you're teaching is effective? And it reminds me of your story about your art teacher and the guy in the boy, you know, saying, I like the Picasso horse, not the abstract. So in just one more little thing is someone says, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. So I've had one person say the opposite. Any thoughts on this? Whatever pleases teaches more effectively, and the difference between education and entertainment.
So I guess as somebody who teaches both undergrads and grads, I think the distinction I would make that in order to sort of make sure that undergrads are on a road whereby they will always read and be curious, I think I would start with what pleases with them. But by the time you get to grad level, you've got to be able to contend with what displeases you.
Really? That's amazing. But did you find that in your own process?
I did, because my first book was on the traveler figure. So the travelers are a kind of historically nomadic indigenous Irish population. They're akin to Romanis, but not the same culture, but akin to it. And I wrote about representations of them in Irish literature. And of course, those representations could be in popular throwaway fiction, that had some book that had been a schlocky bestseller in 1930 and was totally forgotten about, or it could be high art. Synge the playwright was one of my central figures. And so I ended up just reading every book I could find, every literary book I could find, literary depiction I could find, or dramatic depiction I could find of this minority culture in Ireland. And I had to just learn to read, bad bestsellers from 1930 or whatever, because I wanted to see a through line. I wanted to see 100 years of this figure in the Irish imagination, and how it was used by dominant culture to talk to about itself. Really, it was really, our dominant culture was mostly talking about itself when it was pretending to depict this minority. So yeah, I learned to read, and grad students do that because they'll often be doing a project like that where they're trying to find a through line through a massive amount of printed works. So they have to contend with all kinds of quality, all kinds of genre that they mightn't have a natural taste for in doing so.
Wow. Mary, how has writing and teaching shaped your behavior?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I guess it's made me fonder, I think, of like doing things with my hands and exercising as a response to the necessity of sitting down in front of a computer that this requires all the time. So I have taken to swimming and cycling and gardening in a way that I may not have had. And I find that I need that rebalance. Plus, I also find when I'm doing those things, I always have to have something nearby on which to take notes, because that kind of passive activity will generate ideas for me. So I try and keep a balance that way.
Yeah, I keep a little paper and pen in my bicycle, and I have to pull over and write, because the turning of the wheels is some sort of thing about turning your mind. But I want to go back, because I know you wrote about Gone with the Wind, and this is a true phenomenon. And
thinking of reading things that don't necessarily please you. Yes, I did.
Right, but this is a true phenomenon of studying Finnegan's Wake, and especially the year it came out, 1939. So right down the street is Culver City, where Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind came out the same year as Finnegan's Wake, 39. Right. And it's truly phenomenal, because McLuhan and Hitchcock's favorite joke is two goats are back in the back lot of a movie studio, and they're chewing on film coming out of a film can, and one goat turns to the other and goes, "The book was better."
So an interesting little factoid, one of my favorite little factoids that I had in my book, was that F. Scott Fitzgerald was involved in the enormous, overwhelming script for Gone with the Wind.
Was he?
Yeah, and another, I suppose, more well-known fact is that 39 was the film, but 36 was Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind. And it came out the same year as a book I mentioned earlier, William Faulkner's Absalom. They were both up for the Pulitzer.
Oh my, in 36.
Yeah, they were both up for the Pulitzer, and guess who won? It wasn't Faulkner.
It wasn't Faulkner, yeah. But it is great. So just to be clear, you're saying F. Scott Fitzgerald had something to do with the script of the movie?
Not necessarily, because loads of people were drafted in to work on it.
Right.
You know,
but there was some involvement in the script for Gone with the Wind. He read it or had some.
Oh, he read the book. He read the book. He wrote to his daughter Scotty to sort of say, yeah, it was all right, you know, or just words to that effect, you know. He didn't put it down. He thought it had, you know, it wasn't, he liked it pretty much, you know,
Yeah.
but he just, you know, Fitzgerald didn't have a very good career in Hollywood. He was very unhappy at the time that he was there, and he died of a heart attack while he was in that role, and he felt like a failure. So he really would have been considered a big part, really, in the whole process. You know.
Anyways, Mary, it's really been a pleasure, and I look forward to part 2 because I'd like to get into some of the things you touched on, the difference between art and science, the pursuit of truth. How do you determine what's true? And especially this whole phenomenon of class struggles and class crises, and how we learn about it. Is it through the Irish Times, through the newspapers, or is it through our literature? You know, Chomsky says we learn more from literature than we do from science. So we can really explore a lot more. And I really appreciate your time and energy. It was really fun, and I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you, Jerry. It was a pleasure.
Okay, I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends, so we can keep talking forever and ever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.